So this is the second unpopular opinion video where we're going to be talking about Superman today. Starting with our first comment, Orange Juice. Amazing character, but he's often written to be boring. Few do him justice. I think there is some truth to this opinion. Superman can be written a little boring, and based off of this idea, people don't often want him to have consequences or any real life issues. They just want him to be the simple man of hope who is all-time powerful. I personally believe a lot of general audience think Superman's boring. There are some people who like him. There are some people who find him kind of interesting, but then there are a lot of people who couldn't be bothered or who think there are far more interesting characters than Superman. And I think this is why I love Man of Steel so much, because it gave you a different perspective of the character of Superman. Without going into too many details, Man of Steel made the character very interesting in that movie. And prior to Man of Steel coming out, I wasn't a huge Superman fan. I used to be one of those people who thought he was very boring. Emperor Aaron VII. Man of Steel is the most realistic take on Superman, and I mean realistic as in how people would actually think of him if he existed in the real world and how people would view him. I think you can also throw Batman vs Superman into this topic because both movies do show the true nature of humanity towards an alien. I mean, think about it. If aliens came to Earth today or made their presence known, we would act the way they acted towards Superman, if not far worse. And that's something I really love about Man of Steel, is that they didn't just give you consequences that Superman has to go through, but they gave you consequences on Clark just being Superman. There is a consequence being that person, being that thing, being that powerful. I think another reason too why I really agree with this and why I absolutely love this movie, it being my second favorite comic film of all time, is because the Dark Knight trilogy was just coming to an end. This movie came out a year after The Dark Knight Rises, and I was loving these ideas of realistic comic book superhero films, and Man of Steel was as close as it could get. Britton Stegner says, "To me, Superman is someone that everyone dreams of being. People with disabilities and other illnesses wish to be like him, and others just want to be ordinary like Clark Kent, Superman's alter ego. Henry Cavill has one of the best portrayals of Superman, only surpassed by Christopher Reeve, Tim Daly, and George Newbern. And the symbol, no matter who wears it, stands for the same principles that ring true even today. Truth, justice, and the American way." I think this is true because there are attributes to Clark Kent that are good, and of course there are attributes to Superman that are good. And as you mentioned all of these people in your comments, like Henry Cavill, Tim Daly, Christopher Reeve, no matter what version of Superman it is, Superman is always going to be a character that you can look up and say, I want to be this character. Especially a 5, 6, or 7-year-old, whether they look at Superman in a comic panel, whether they watch him in a movie, whether they see him on a cereal box. This is probably the best role model of any comic character you could ever have. Circular entropy. In my opinion, the moments where Superman is actually hopeful and inspiring are too few and far between. Being joyful and saving people from disasters are just normal acts of heroism and not the thing that inspires people to do good themselves. I also don't think Superman should be all of those things. It's completely unrealistic to expect someone to be the light without any moments of despair. True despair. Light cannot exist without darkness. Hope is not the absence of despair, it is the ability to come back to our purpose again and again. Alicia Garza. I really like this comment. Some great points brought up here, and it's something I've been saying for a long time. Yes, Superman's hopeful, but he needs to have a good enough reason to be hopeful. You know, a lot of people like to use the argument that Martha and John Kent instilled hope into him as a young boy, and that's why he'll always be hopeful. But you gotta think of it in other perspectives, that the hope of two human beings can get pretty drowned out by the noise of 8 billion people. In some instances where people absolutely love Superman, and then in other instances where they absolutely hate him. And I think that's what Man of Steel and Batman vs Superman tried to show you. He's gonna go through consequences, he's gonna go through very specific situations that is going to shake his confidence, it's going to shake his sense and ideas of hope. He's going to get tested, and there are going to be times where he fails. But guess what? Guess what he always does in those movies? He always comes back, and he always does the right thing. And most importantly, he doesn't just have the hope of humanity and hope of the planet. He has the hope in himself that he will always come back to do the right thing, which is what those movies show him doing. As much as Superman is supposed to be the hopeful representation of characters in comics, superhero characters in general, a lot of these comic book characters are supposed to have that hope factor. And not even just that, Superman needs to be challenged. He needs to go through dark times to come out hopeful. He needs to understand what hope actually is so he can actually go through with it. That, to me, is an interesting Superman. Speeding Bear says, Superman is a great comic book character, arguably the best ever. My favorite part about him is his personality. He's basically a representation of what a superhero should be. Now, getting to my hot take, I have a huge problem with people trying to turn him into a villain. As I said, my favorite part about him is his personality, and I think evil Superman sucks. Also, I want to see less Superman and more Superboy, because Superboy is an interesting character. So first and foremost, I will say I do agree with him being possibly the greatest comic book character ever made, because if you think about it, without Superman, there is more than likely no DC, there's no Marvel, and there's a good chance that superheroes do not look the way they look, or even feel the way they feel from other companies and indie comic book brands without him. Although what you said about him being evil, I don't think that is a hot take. What is the hot take is what I'm about to say. I love evil Superman. I think evil Superman is one of the coolest things in DC Comics. I liked evil Superman even before Zack Snyder was doing it. And the thing is Snyder wasn't making Superman evil just 'cause. Superman was going to turn evil because of the specific plot line he had with Darkseid. At the end of the day, that Superman was always going to be good. But even beyond that, I've always liked evil Superman. Like I said, I was one of those people who didn't really like Superman before because I thought he was boring, and it was evil Superman I actually always liked. But as for your second point, I don't love Superboy. I don't hate Superboy. I think he's a pretty okay character, but I do agree. I do hope to see more of him in the future. Superboy Prime, that is. My favorite Superboy is the evil version of him. I think the idea of this interdimensional Superboy that can take on like 3 Supermans by himself is so badass. Z Production says, the belt is better than the underwear. Simple, easy, and to the point, in which I absolutely agree. I think the belt is much better than the underwear. I actually am not a big fan of underwear or trunks on superhero character designs in general. I don't hate it by any means, it's just not my favorite look. The picture I used for Superman in this community post I actually think is perfect. That red belt perfectly balances out the blue top and the blue pants. Recently, for some reason, there seems to be this really big want and need for trunks on Superman, which I don't really understand why. I don't think it's that big of a deal at all. But like I said, I don't hate it. If the design is very specific and keen on it, it can work. But I agree, I prefer not to have it. Martin says, personally, I would have had Zod be sent to the Phantom Zone in Man of Steel solely because he had potential as a recurring villain if Warner Brothers wasn't brain dead. And the trunks shouldn't be what defines a good soups. As for your trunks line, we just got done talking about this. I agree. It's not the trunks that make Superman a good character. It couldn't be farther from that. Just give him a good suit. As for your first point, though, I see what you're saying. I personally absolutely love that Superman killed Zod. Not because I want to see Superman as a killer, but because that was literally all he could do. And it drove the plot line of Superman to understand such a consequence of that magnitude. Not only just killing to save the people of Earth, but killing the last of his kind. That is a huge thing he had to go through, and it's heartbreaking, really. The one thing you left in this comment that I absolutely love and couldn't agree more with is Warner Brothers being brain dead. They were brain dead then, they're brain dead now, and they're going to continue to be brain dead moving forward. Platana Rico, just too boring for me. Too powerful. And see, this somewhat goes back to the first comment of not being written properly. I don't know if you are a general audience member who just watches these movies out of enjoyment, or if you are a comic book fan. I can't judge you, but all I'm gonna say is that is what general audience members do think of Superman. Whether they're right or wrong of thinking of him that way, that is just how it is. I think there is a huge amount of general audiences who may appreciate Superman, but they're not overly excited for him. No one really cares about Superman the way they might care about Batman and Spider-Man. And I think that is what Man of Steel did. They tried to give you a different perspective on the character, a perspective on the character that made him feel much more interesting, instead of, like I said, just being your generic, ever so hopeful man who can't be beaten by anything. Blobbles says, I really don't like Man of Steel. I think it's a pretty awful movie that doesn't really get Superman right. Like, at all. Blobbles, 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 blobbles. Okay, to each their own. This is obviously one I'm going to disagree with wholeheartedly. It is my second favorite comic film of all time, but hey, you obviously have a very specific understanding of Superman to yourself on why you don't like this movie. I'm not one to tell you otherwise, and I'm not one to berate you for feeling the way you feel. I do think this is a problem with Superman today. The problem we are experiencing with Superman, there are so many sides of the character that not many people are ever so graciously capable of coming to terms with one another. Some people just want hopeful Superman, nothing more. Some people want this Snyder style of storytelling to Superman. Some people want something completely different. I don't know what they want, but they want something different. And I don't know how that will help the success of Superman going forward. Big boy Yum Yum. Superman needs to wear trunks in Superman Legacy. Gunn said that Superman will be guided by human kindness in a world that sees kindness as old-fashioned. And the trunks symbolize that perfectly because a lot of people see superheroes wearing trunks as a worn-out trope. Maybe I'm just overthinking it, but I really want the trunks. I don't care if people think it's goofy. If you like trunks on characters, all power to you. Nothing wrong with that. It's all personal preference. Based off of Gunn's statements, if kindness is an old-fashioned thing in today's society, I'll tell you right now, putting trunks on Superman isn't going to make things any better. If anything, people are going to be even more cruel and put even more jokes on that design of Superman. And maybe whereas the trunks do symbolize that, the question is will people even take that into consideration, or will they even care that it's part of the design? Also, we do have to think maybe sometimes certain designs just have to go away. Maybe they don't work as good as they have before. Who knows? If the trunks work, they work. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Delta Productions. Tyler Hoechlin, except for Cavill, is the most realistic take on Superman and is a very compelling and complex version of Superman, and is probably my second favorite Superman. He just embodies who Superman is. I have heard a lot of people say this. I can't really give my opinion as I've never watched the show. I've only seen clips and scenes. Although from what I have seen, he does a really good job, and you can even tell there's a lot of that show that is modeled and inspired from Zack Snyder's Superman. There are actually two comments here that say very similar things. One from Grevard Best Boy and the other from Hero Toys. One says Superman's Rogues Gallery is terribly lacking and needs a complete overhaul. The other says his Rogues Gallery is overrated but good. It's interesting, I'm very neutral on this. There are some villains that I think are fantastic from him, but then there are other villains that I think are very, very forgettable. Personally, my answer to this is Superman needs more villains who will mentally challenge him other than Lex Luthor, instead of just having villains that are there for punching bags. As much as we all love Superman having the bronze, and we need to see massive fight scenes in Superman movies, it is just something we need. We do also need the brains. Well, now it's time for my bold opinion. And my bold opinion on Superman, I really like the evil, darker Superman. We already got into this a little bit earlier in this video, but I'm going to expand on it a little bit more. I like the Superman who may go off the rails from time to time, and he doesn't care where he's fighting. If he's in the middle of a battle, he's gonna beat you into the ground. I like the Superman who fully gives up on hope and just turns evil. I like the Superman who walks around with red glowing eyes because of how angry he is. I think it's really cool that you can take somebody who is so good, so passionate, so hopeful, and one thing can impact his life. Something that really affects him to the core. And it is enough to make this guy go evil. It is enough to twist this man's brain to the point of no return. Now, that symbol of hope, that S that people see hovering above them during the day, saving them and protecting them, now that symbol becomes a symbol of terror and fear. It's the same thing with Batman and his kill rule. I'm not saying I would make my Superman that way. I just think stories of Superman like that are very neat. To understand Superman being as good as he is, you also have to understand how quickly this man could become evil and how deeply impactful it would be if that ever happened. But guys, there you go. There's some unpopular opinions and hot takes on the Superman character. Now, once again, if I didn't get to everyone's comments, the community post is still up, so you guys can go check out some other comments. And if you guys didn't get around to commenting before, well, now's your chance to do it again. Let me know in the comments below some more bold takes and unpopular opinions. That is all I have for you on this one, everyone. We'll see you on the next unpopular opinion video for whoever the next character will be. But until then, I will talk to you all very soon.